back to Sonoma Brain Trust. Today I have my co-host Daren Blonski with Sonoma Wealth Advisors, and I don't have Mary Piasta today, but we have the other half of Haeuser, Valluzzo, and Piasta. We have Tony Valluzzo joining us today. Tony, thanks for joining us. Him and Daren are going to give us a real good dive into the economy and what's happening. But before we get into that, I wanted to quickly jump into what's happening in the real estate market. Conventional wisdom would have you guys thinking that buying or selling real estate in a recession is not a great idea. But what we've been finding, and I've been telling you guys this week after week, is that our real estate market is just, I'm going to say it's on fire, even though that's a really poor choice of words right now. But we have not seen a slowdown at all due to the pandemic. We've actually seen an increase in sales, and right now interest rates are hovering just below 3%. So we are starting to see a slowdown, but not because of the pandemic or the lack of buyers. We're actually seeing a slowdown because inventory is so tight that buyers are unable to actually make a purchase on anything right now. So with interest rates being at, just under 3% and the buyers out there trying to take advantage, we have just insanely low inventory, which is really starting to put a strain on the market and the real estate sales even more than what we were seeing before pre-COVID. And just to give you guys an update on how our market is looking, I wanted to share a quick market update, and I'm going to do a screen share. So can you guys see this okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to show you what our sales were looking like from this August versus last August. And you can see almost straight across the board, with a few exceptions, both price and numbers of home sold have skyrocketed. I think probably the most surprising one, and Tony, we were just talking about this, is Sonoma, which saw a 50% increase in price and a 35% increase in home sales in the last year. Healdsburg, Cloverdale, we've kind of seen a dip off into those places, but those are a bit more rural than, Sonoma and Petaluma and everything. But as I told you, I do have buyers from San Francisco that are actually currently looking in the Cloverdale area. So that 11% might actually increase a bit more.
So Chelsie, I swim in the world of bubbles. And what do I mean by that? By stock market bubbles, by bond market bubbles, by real estate bubbles. And I'm constantly watching that and paying attention. My gut looks at these numbers and says, this is not sustainable.
I agree. I don't think it's sustainable, but I think right now it's highly due to that, what we've dubbed it, the urban flight syndrome. And it's those Silicon Valley, San Francisco people who have the extra income and the extra assets right now to make this move. I don't think it is sustainable, but who's to say how long it's actually going to last?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. And one mantra we always say in the traders world is that bubbles tend to go on longer than anyone can stay solvent. And the reality is the bubbles can continue to go. And it's really clear that the Fed is trying and doing everything they can to keep this baby going, especially until the election. And certainly you can count on the fact the administration is going to push it until the election. And believe it or not, the president and the executive order has a lot of ability to continue to push. And I think the real estate market is one area where you see what's called the TINA trade, and that is there is no alternative, right? So if you've got excess assets, where are you going to put them right now? Well, if you can go snatch up real estate, you can get out of the city, then that could be a TINA trade, right? Where else are you going to put the money if you already have money to survive on, right? And because we have such a disparity between the haves and the have-nots out there, you've got this, a lot of the haves are going in, they're buying up real estate, putting it into the stock market, which is an interesting sociological discussion, at least. One headwind I did see this weekend, though, that a lot of tech companies are telling essentially people moving out of the city and out of Silicon Valley that, hey, we're going to cut your pay by up to 8% if you move out.
But maybe that's not going to be a huge thing for them if they're moving into an area that their cost of living is going to be less.
That right. Yeah. I don't know if it's a headwind or not, but it's certainly now you're getting these tech companies saying, well, wait, we're not going to pay you extra because you work in Silicon Valley if you're never coming in anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I had seen somewhere that said remote work is here to stay because companies have actually seen productivity from their employees like increase substantially during all of this. So
I've seen something like that too, but I've also seen that with all the pressure on commercial real estate, especially in cities, somebody was telling, or I read, I think that Amazon in their Seattle location didn't renew their lease recently, or they let it lapse and possibly are in negotiations to reduce it, or maybe they just want to have the flexibility to go elsewhere. But that and the fact that working from home is a requirement right now. But when it's not a requirement, how many people are going to want to go back to work? And if not all the time, is once a week acceptable? Is once a month acceptable? And how is that going to influence where they decide to live? It's one thing to move from Silicon Valley to the middle of Nebraska, where you can buy a house for a nice house for very cheap. But at the same time, if they're going to have to commute back even once a quarter, is that going to be something that they're going to want to do from Nebraska? I think I don't know. I'm not a economist by any means, but I would wonder how much that's going to affect the market in the future and keep just a little bit of flux.
I think you're onto something. I think people are right now making a lot of short-term decisions and not thinking long-term. I think COVID has played out so much longer than what everyone already thought it was going to. And I think right now people are just looking at like the Saturday and they're not really looking at what's going to come next month, next year. I think they're just looking at short-term goals or short-term plans right now.
And to support your point, Tony, one of the things we also talk a lot about in kind of market analysis is that when we have crises like COVID, trends that already were in place tend to get exaggerated, right? And we already had a trend towards working from home. We already had a trend of people moving out of cities. And because of technology and the ability to do that, and so perhaps COVID is just accelerating that trend. But like anything, there's this pillar, right? It swings way over here, and here we are. It's going to swing back to some degree, right? What degree, I guess, is the great question. Certainly, I wouldn't put it past us to see 20% of our workforce now working from home, which in that kind of transitions us to the economic impact for COVID-19 on this was just presented by Robert Eiler, PhD from Sonoma State University. There. And this was a presentation he did to the Board of Supervisors, which I thought was pretty interesting. I'll just show you a couple slides here, but if you look on key findings, you guys can see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you look at better, medium, worse, right? So what are we looking at here? We're looking at in the best case scenario, we're going to lose 20,000 jobs in Sonoma County with an income loss, revenue loss for local municipality revenue. And then you've got medium and worse, right? So let's say we hit the medium, that's 30,000 jobs is gone because of COVID and leaving, which that's a significant hit. This is just talking about GDP and GDP forecasts. I'm not going to dive too much into there, but this is interesting on the local state July 2020 Sonoma County labor force. You can see the civilian workforce, civilian employment, and civilian unemployment rates are up. The good news is Sonoma County hasn't been affected as much as the rest of California, right? I'd say that's the good news of this slide. The bad news is it's still pretty significant. And to your point, Chelsie, that you were just pointing out, the median listing price for homes for sale in Sonoma County, look at that orange line or the black line, but look at in California, what's happening. So we're seeing prices across the board shoot up all over the place. And, I'm a big believer in Newton's law, right? I live and die by Newton's law in my business, and what goes up must come down, right? And if you get something that exaggerates that far up, you're going to get a correction. It's just a matter of time. It's not an if, it's a when. And so I think it's very important that we're on the lookout for that when.
Well, and to that point, Daren, if you, that next slide after the industry level jobs percentage change from 19 of April to July 20th or July 2020. The aspect of it that kind of pops out at me is, the Eiler's comment is that local and regional manufacturing and storage and transportation will increase, right? We've all heard about the kinks in the supply chain, especially as they affect grocery stores, things that affect us every day. So there's a whole lot of area where we can improve there. And of course, we know that in the food service industry, in the wineries, anything that's basically caters to tourists is heavily hit as well. But if you look, the thing that really pops out at me is that construction is still low. And I understand that things are changing as they always are, and supply chain will affect construction materials as well. But now the price of lumber is supposed to be changing. It's supposed to be actually going up, which is going to limit construction. And if you take that with the fact that a lot of people who are in the food service industry are people on the lower income levels, you're going to have some pretty serious, not just issues with increase in housing, the prices of housing, but also rent. And that puts a lot of stress on an economy and a lot of stress at the lower levels. What's the effect of that? Well, it could be pretty widespread. I mean, we're talking about a second wave for COVID. Who knows if that's going to exacerbate it by forcing families to move in together, to increase the kind of the number of people in the household, as well as other things. I mean, further on, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but further on, you do see that there's a pretty positive forecast for farm workers increasing, and that's a positive, and that makes sense. I mean, even though from what I hear, the wine industry is taking a hit with all the smoke, but until some of these lower end jobs come back, it's gonna have an effect that we aren't going to see for a while. And so that really, to me, is the most, I guess, scariest thing, is that we just don't, it's not necessarily an issue of the haves and the have-nots, but it's an issue of what happens to the have-nots. What's the effect of that? What's, health-wise especially, but economically, because we rely on these people. We rely on various, individuals to help us with not just the food service industry, but the low-paying jobs. If they're priced out, not just in cost of housing, but in other ways too, because remember, the kinks in the supply chain are making prices in grocery stores and everything go up. What's going to be the long-term effect of that?
Well, case in point, Tony, it was funny, interesting, and sad. I was talking to a client who runs a housing cooperative for people who come up to help with the harvest and the grapes in Napa, and they had COVID breakout there. And I think, to your point, like, this organization literally has to provide housing for its farm workers, because there isn't housing for their farm workers to come live in a decent environment while they're staying here. And I think if you get the increased cost in housing prices that Chelsie was pointing out, plus you get this lumber, which I was just looking for the facts. Don't quote me on the exact number, but it's somewhere $6,000 to $8,000 per new home built is added to the cost because of just the lumber increase. And that you're going to see that with other commodities, especially if we start to get inflation kicking up here, and a lot of argument on whether or not it will go deflate or inflate, whatever. You can find really smart people, intelligent people that have been right in the past on both sides to say one or the other is happening, right? But the bottom line is, we're continuing to see the impacts of an increased cost of living here in Sonoma County. And as you see these jobs, like you can see food and service and drinking places are down. A lot of these jobs here are actually secondary jobs. They're jobs that people take in addition to their other full-time jobs to get them through. And if those aren't available, then it further compounds that issue. So I think, that's a major risk and headwind. If you look at industry changes in jobs and locations, look at accommodation, food service, public administration, I was shocked to see that healthcare and social assistance is actually down given what we're seeing with COVID. I thought that was rather interesting. Retail trades down. Again, retail and accommodation foods, those are a lot of part-time jobs. And that will have an impact on the lower end of the economic scale. Couple other, this is interesting. Home prices percent changes 1 year over year. And you can see here in Sonoma County, are not up as much. Interesting, West County is sure getting an influx of people, right? I wonder, go ahead, Chelsie.
People, from what I'm hearing from like my San Francisco buyers, is they want a yard for their dogs, but they don't want to walk out and touch their neighbors. They want more space, and that's what you can get in the West County areas. You could get outside and not look directly into your neighbor's eyes or touch your neighbor through the fence, and that's what they're looking for right now.
Interesting. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. So I was just going to shoot down through a bunch of this. I won't kill everybody with charts and death by charts. Tuesdays at 5:00, my partner and I do death by charts, which is like 80 to 90 charts in an hour. And anyone who joins us enjoys that, but it's a lot. So I didn't want to do that today, but I just thought I'd point out some of this real interesting economic data coming out of Sonoma County and what we're facing here. And, it really, anyone in the food service, retail, and that's Sonoma, you think of the square and then you think of the smoke that's socked in, it's just crushing these retailers. So if you're a local Sonoman, get out there, support your local businesses because they need it right now in a big way.
Well, I just want to point out something else that sorry, Anthony, but the fires, there's a lot of talk about people wanting to leave. So we're probably going to see a drastic difference in our overall, just what makes up Sonoma, because it was just in the Press Democrat yesterday, I think, about how people are really reconsidering living in the area just because the evacuations and the fire threat and everything else is really causing them to have a lot of panic. So we're not seeing it yet, a surge of people listing their houses, but I think that there are a lot of conversations about people wanting to leave Sonoma just for that fear of fire, because the last 3 years has just been nonstop. And
I think you're right. And to go along with that, I've been hearing rumblings of insurance companies that are paying out because of these areas on fire now really questioning. I mean, we saw it after 2017, places near or in Tahoe that aren't getting insured. I mean, there are places as close as Napa, 30 minutes away, that, they're on the market. And for all of us that watch the prices, they're at close to $250 a square foot. And you kind of got to wonder why. And then you realize, well, nobody's going to insure that. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be a growing piece of it. Obviously the centers like downtown Sonoma and other Main Street areas are going to be a little bit better protected. But the area of Geyserville has already been hit by 2 fires this season. And here we are maybe halfway through. So
Daren, we're just in the beginning.
Yeah, because the issues in Sonoma County are the northern winds, and we haven't gotten the northern winds yet, right? And you see those in the fall, in the later fall, that's when things really get bad. You get these red flag warnings, but it's the northern winds that then push it down in off the hills. But I think you're dead on. I think there's a lot of people questioning, like, okay, I love Sonoma County, but if for 3 months or 4 months out of the year, I'm inhaling cigarettes every day because I'm breathing smoke, do I really want to live here? Does this really make sense? We had friends that they had their house, their whole property burned down up in Vacaville, except for the house. They had 80 acres up in Pleasant Valley, and they they bought a summer house in Montana and said, you know, maybe we'll just stay here because what's the point? So, you know, lots of change going on. And perhaps this is just a crisis, like I said earlier, that's perpetuating what was already happening. That's an exodus of California and from taxes, from other things.
I think long term, we're going to see a change in the makeup of Sonoma County. For sure.
Yeah.
I did want to point out, I think it's really important for the listeners out there, if you were impacted by fire, last week we had a really interesting gentleman on, and he talked all about how to do the insurance calculations on what you actually lost. And with lumber prices going up, it's really important that you look at that really closely because it might make it unaffordable to rebuild if commodities go up, but you're only insured for a certain level. So certainly keep an eye out for that video if you haven't looked at it yet.
They also offer a pre-disaster plan to make sure that your house is properly insured, to make sure that if you do lose your home, you have the right coverage to pay for the costs. He mentioned, to Tony's point earlier, lumber has more than doubled since 2015.
Well, there you have it. Facts over figures. Another round of Sonoma Brain Trust. Thanks for joining us. Tony, thanks for stepping in today and helping us out from the economic side.
My pleasure.
Certainly feel free to leave a comment, subscribe. We love to hear your feedback. If you're interested in coming on, chatting with us in Sonoma Valley and talking a little bit about what you do and your perspective on the world, we'd love to hear from you.